which is Floyd McClung, which brings us back again operationally to keep integrated the Ministry of Evangelism, Training, Mercy Ministries within Youth with a Mission, so that the university is not cut off and going the opposite direction, but rather is under the authority of Youth with a Mission. And in the flow of Youth with a Mission, it's a part of our overall evangelism of the world, or the fulfillment of the Great Commission. It is not something to turn us abruptly, but it is a part of the broadening of our effectiveness for the Great Commission in the world. Then, as far as this is we have a broadening of this particular team, under which we call it the Executive Council, which includes these three, Loren, Howard, and Floyd, plus we have Tom Bloomer and David Boyd, and also Len Green. So that this executive committee, not council, sorry, this executive committee has been meeting together regularly in order to try to transition from Pacific and Asia Christian University into a University of the Nations role. Now, beyond this, we are still paralleling the structure of Youth with a Mission, because a school is the next mode down, while Tom Bloomer is taking the academic affairs role under Howard as far as this field is concerned, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, or is it just Europe? It started under Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and his last statement is, I don't know whether I can handle all this. But anyway, we're going to have to understand that in this transition time, our focus is on the schools under the various bases, regions, nations, areas of the world. And then as we try to tie them together, we're going to do it from this committee, and we'll build the infrastructure in the middle. So this time together is a gathering. As most of you, I understand some of you have not received our last letter that we put out, but we've been putting out letters for the last few months describing what this time is all about, the kinds of the content that we're going to be dealing with. And so we began with the history of the university vision and the vision of it itself, as well as our basic values. And then we had our day of intercession. And during that time of intercession, we are processing through doing this in the way that we have learned as a mission to do. Taking the burden on, taking it before the Lord, allowing the Holy Spirit to guide us in intercession, spiritual warfare, praise and worship. And that's what, and meditation on the Word. And that's what Friday during the day was about. And then as we came into the Friday evening time, Tom gave us a historic overview. And the point of it is to say, this is something that God has called us to do. It has been done in history. There are pitfalls and concerns, but God is calling us to that. And then came the time of what in YWAM. We've done about 3 times, but mostly just leadership times in YWAM. And we called it the laying down of the rod from Exodus chapter 3 and 4, where Moses was told to lay down his identity in order to pick up the new identity that he had. And so we use that term laying down of the rods, and that can very easily be misunderstood. But what it is number one, we are laying down self-interest. We're laying down authority or titles or anything that would set us apart from, as we pick up the group identity and call. And in this case, I know that a few of you have not been in a setting like that before, but what we were saying is simply we're setting aside that which is past, though we have the understanding of the university of, 12, 15 years in the mission itself. We are embracing that, and that was with the commitment, so that as a group, when we start out, we're unifying the group so that then we can get into the diversities. If you don't move from a point of commitment, then you really don't have a group. You don't have the unity part of the diversity or university. And so at the beginning, we wanted, after the time of explanation of vision and history and values and of intercession in hearing the word of the Lord, to say, we respond. And after all, obedience is really, you commit to the word of the Lord, and then you find out what all it means. If you wait until you find out what all it means, what year are we going to do it in? You see, we've had 11 years and so on. But during those 11 years, we've had those times of commitment. Our last major time was with the Board of Regents, where they made that commitment. And we noticed it released the faith, it released excitement, it released understanding that followed our time of commitment of embracing the University of the Nations. And so, of course, they had embraced a few years before that the Pacific and Asia Christian University. So what we were doing was catching up spiritually in unity that which the Board of Regents and others have done, but now within this context, so that then we could, as on Saturday, start talking about the diverse issues that were involved. And then Dr. Cass, as she gave to us some of the elements of group processing that we are endeavoring to apply this week and into next week. We want you to understand, hey, I'm a blocker here, or I'm one who is fulfilling this role. I'm more task-oriented, or I'm more maintenance-oriented, and so on, so that you can start seeing it's not wrong to involve yourself in the discussion. It's not wrong, or you're not betraying trust to say, I disagree on this, but this part I can agree on. It's the way we do this. And so the more we can understand how we are processing, even within that small group, and start to identify, hey, this is the role I take usually. I ought to take this role a little more. And as we do that and understand, now we're giving a tool, but more than that, we're trying to also reach the goals that we have in mind. Now, the goals we have in mind for this time, we are not a legislative body. We don't come as a representative body. We would have to have one from each base, or one from according to the population of your base, or however. But rather, you have come because of burden of commitment and vision of the university. And that's why I said on the first day, I'm interested in those that have come, the very makeup of the group. It's a totally different makeup than any other group we've ever called together in YWAM or anywhere in the world, obviously. But as you have come in this light, I recognize that you are representing all over the world, 200 and some people. You are representing our cross-culturalness. I'm not happy that we're not more two-thirds world than we are. But on the other hand, we've got to go from where we are to where we're going. But if we will, I bring that up not to put guilt or condemnation on us that have arrived, but rather let's strive to include and incorporate the others. And so as we've committed to unity around the vision to the extent we understand, and my desire in every way is not to coerce you to make commitments beyond what you're in good conscience able to do, and that's why I said it the other night. But as we make that commitment to that level of unity, now we're going to build into the next, which has brought us into the diversity. And Dr. Ward today has given us, plus the social times over the weekend, Dr. Ward today has given us a focus on now some of the questions that we have to answer. And they are very real. These have not been considered, these have all been considered before in many settings, but they've not been considered in such a broad group in Youth with a Mission until now. And what we are asking you to do is bring out your questions. Feel free to discuss. You say, but I don't know what the party line is. We don't know. We're finding out in this group. And when your questions, and then we start to pose some answers that I believe will come out of this 2 weeks' time, we will have to take it back to the Board of Regents that will be meeting in a few months. Understand, we are people accountable. We're under authority, and we wouldn't want it any other way. But they are looking to us as a group, and in fact, 3 of the council members are coming in to hear us at the end so that they get that fresh date and understanding. That'll be Tom Hallis and Lynn Green and Floyd McClung. And as they're coming in for this, just to hear fresh, say all that you want to say, because this is out of this process, and we're just processing and surfacing the questions. And I am so appreciative of the help we're getting from Dr. Ward here on knowing the right questions to ask. It just streamlines and brings out those areas that we're feeling frustration or questions in. And so understand, we're walking through the middle section now of that, of the three stages of development of a group. And in that time, we're going to be able to do the greatest work time on this. Now, as we move forward, there are other questions that most of these have been said in your letters to you ahead of time, but we will be dealing with such subjects on how to start a school and curriculum development and records and communications. What does it mean, admissions? What about assessment, grades, all those questions, pass, fail, networking, communication, many categories that we're going to be dealing with. And tomorrow afternoon, the leadership teams, and one letter went out, we were sorry for that because that was a mistake, but always every group were to have a leadership team, not just one person. There is a coordinator for the team, but there's always a leadership team over each one of the faculties plus the other areas that are meeting over the weekend. And so those team leaders are going to be meeting tomorrow afternoon, and they are fleshing out their projects, goals, and questions and so on that they will need to be answering within the subgroups or the weekend groups that are meeting together all over Switzerland. So as you see that process going along, then we will come back to some of the issues that will be corporate issues. And one of the things we're hoping to get out of this time are the details of courses that will be included in the catalog. If you can see the difficulty of our integrating the two streams together. In Youth with a Mission, by the way, we have the right in our bases, and this is stated in our Manila Covenant and all, that you can create a school that doesn't have to be a part of the University of the Nations. On the other hand, we also want to give an open heart invitation to all who want to be a part of the University of the Nations, so that training doesn't have to be, it's not a forced thing, there's always an alternative. And so you can be a part, but you don't have to be a part. That's the volunteerism that we are built on as a mission and a movement. But on the other hand, those that want to be a part, we've got to find a way to integrate together like those Lego toys, interfacing, and be able to transfer the students from one place to another, and then from us to other institutions as well. And so the question of how far along the line of non-formal to formal, where are we? And we want to be discussing that, but those questions specifically are impacted when we try to talk about records and so on. So when we come back together, one of the things that is a goal of this weekend, one of the areas, has to do with what courses are you talking about and how do they flow together. And let's get some content down so we can take the catalog. Now, I need to explain on our own printing of the catalog ahead of this time. We had to go to print this springtime with the understanding of the executive committee and others that we would have to have 1 year in order to integrate the two programs, and yet we would do it under the name of University of the Nations Kona and try to give understanding that there are other courses also available throughout the world. So we've tried to do that. But when you have a program where our cash flow each year is around $6 million, we've got 440 on staff, we've got 1,400 and some students flowing through Kona and all, you don't just suddenly stop and shoot your staff and stop the banks and the bills and all of that all at one time. And only the woman in Solomon's two mothers, you know, over the baby, you can always tell who really is a mother of the new University of the Nations. The one that wants to shoot the baby is not the one. So I say that in that we have a part of the flow of the University of the Nations that has matured to 11-year-old, and suddenly now we're trying to bring up the others, and it's a very difficult time of transition that we're trying to work out in every way. But having said that, we're doing our best to do that so that there will be a blending, and it'll take many months, in fact 2 or 3 years, for that blending to be consummated even within our movement. I recognize that's what processing time takes. And so as we're trying to do this, we're at the same time trying to encourage the catch-up without in any way stifling the growth and the work of and maturing of the individuals and their leadership and roles and structures of those that have been working for many years along the way. So I want to encourage all of those from Kona. There are 56 here from Kona. And the next largest group is from Switzerland, which is 29 from 5 bases in Switzerland, and 22 from Great Britain, and so on. And so I want to encourage all of you to feel free to participate as we have these interchanges. And some of you have been discussing for years questions that are brand new for others. So let's bend over backwards to one another to hear one another and what we're saying. And then also understand that so far our only legal foundation, because we have a legal consideration, and a document such as the catalog is a legal document that we're held to. And then we have our YWAM authority structure that we are trying to be considerate of. And our legal basis presently is all based on what I shared with you in history on the Hawaiian government setting that we have started under. And we're trying to spread that now to other governments in a few strategic locations, not to every government in the world, but rather those that will recognize around those governments. For example, a Commonwealth government will recognize other Commonwealth institutions and so on. Now, help me on this committee. Have I covered most of the questions that you wanted to see covered? Oh, yes. In addition, out here, we have an advisory board, and these are made up of men of various parts of the world who are non-YWAM. They are successful in a category or so that will be very key to us. Men like Mr. Michael Loren, who is he's a judge, and he's a businessman, entrepreneur, and so on, from England. Or you have Ambassador Bill Turner, who has been at a high level as an ambassador in the economic community of the world. You have an importer-exporter businessman who has been very successful in Indonesia. You have different ones serving from different parts of the world. Mr. Veit, Gunther Veit, an industrialist from Germany. And these men, in spite of a lot of these boards tend to become what you might call a fundraising board. We don't use them in that way, though all of them are committed. and they help financially, but what we really do is take issues before them that speak into us that may not come within our group, but because of the objectivity of them, they are able to ask some hard questions. We just lay out our financial sheets, our different documents, and what our present issues and all. And they spend about, we do this 2 times a year, and we will spend about 5 days together during those times, 4 days together. And we just go in detail over major issues that are going on with the university. And it always spills over into YWAM General because you can't help but deal with those as well. So that's a very important key. Any other questions? I'm especially looking, Maureen? All right, as far as the questions that will be raised during this time, the questions bring us into focus on, we'll have to prioritize the questions, and we will do this as facilitators. We're meeting together, and leadership, there's about 10 of us or so that are meeting following this time. And Barb here is taking as detailed notes as I've never seen anybody like Barb. She just takes things and absorbs them and spits them right back out the next day. And I don't know when she sleeps. But I watched this last year, and I'm amazed at her gifting. But we will try to understand overview, and you will get the notes as well back from the entire time. But we will take on the 2 days following, morning to night, 2 days in which we will try to summarize and prioritize your suggestions, your questions, your answers that you have come up with during this time. We want Youth with a Mission to give birth to this university in the full sense of the word. In some ways it's been birthed, in other ways it hasn't been. And so we're trying to do this. At the same time, we'd like you to buy into that which is being done, which can only happen as you get your questions answered, and can do so with integrity and full free conscience. And so that's, should the Lord be calling you into it. And if He's not, we're just as happy for you to continue in a training program within Youth with a Mission and yet not be a part of this. You understand? We keep those options open. If you ever cut off people's options, then you don't even have a tree of life in the Garden of Eden. So God does that, and we want to always have, that's not a good illustration. But anyway, I had to back down on that one. But anyway, the point is we'd always like you to have 2 roads to walk. And that includes, at this time, as we're forming the University of the Nations. Anyway, have some more fruit. Anyway. But then, in order to develop the structure, which there has to be a whole middle management structure of the university, that's going to take time. If you develop the structure first, it's not going to come naturally out of the grassroots and out of the group at large. You'll end up trying to get a fund in order to hire in your specialists in the categories, and we're not trying to do that. We're trying to present something that we do feel God is asking us to do that'll come out of the very soil of Youth with a Mission, those called into it worldwide and those that God will call in. And as it comes out of that, we're not trying to set up some superimposed structure on it, but recognize leadership. And this, I refer you back. Have you been able to get a chance to read that on the appointment of leadership and how it's done on the eldership function? If not, get that chance to read it, that paper I gave you the other night. But that's the way we will recognize as people starts a school, and then that school begins to multiply and becomes a cluster of schools, and the life flowing out of it, the fruit of that person's ministry, and it becomes a cluster, and then we put several of these clusters together. That becomes a faculty, say, of Christian ministries or counseling, healthcare, or one of the other faculty groupings. Even those names are up for discussion. What we're not going to discuss is the University of the Nation's name. We've done that for years now, and we just came to that one last a year ago in July. And we're not, you can bring all the decision, your ideas in on a new name, but that's not going to get anywhere right now because emotionally we're not ready for that one. But if you want to talk about a new name in a faculty college grouping, that's okay. It won't be decided here, but it will be taken seriously, very seriously. And the 7 is not a limitation on the numbers of faculties or colleges we're going to have. We're not saying it's only going to be 7. It could be 10. There could be other faculties, or it could be a center for the educational group, a center on a particular area, like we do have in Kona a center for Pacific culture. And that's a part of our particular geographical mandate in that part of the world. So the way this will come about, obviously, out of this will rise leadership. And we will recognize that leadership as it becomes available to us, and then there will be an international structure. In the meantime, we're having to blend what is rising in other parts of the world and what we already have in Kona, and we're not going to do some ripping and tearing, but rather a blending. This gets back to our laying down of rods that we started with, and that is we just lay down that ownership. We're not talking about laying aside responsibilities at this point in time at all, but rather saying let's incorporate and embrace the whole so that there's room for everybody to participate in the university worldwide. That's our heart. Do you hear it? Our heart is to be inclusive of all who are led of the Lord within YWAM to be a part of this, and we're trying to make room, and please understand the processing takes time. We're not going to at the same time hurt people or shoot babies. Cut the babies in half like Solomon suggested. We're not going to do that, but we are going to do our best to do the blending, and it's going to take time. Any other for clarification? All right, John Peterson is going to come, and we want to give plenty of time for expressions within the group, and this will allow surfacing to take place of key questions, and especially 3 seem to stand out. Now, there were a lot of questions that Dr. Ward spoke to, but 3, what is evangelism? And we were dealing with that in part on Saturday morning. I feel like we could almost come in our spirit to closure on that, not trying to polarize, but is God trying to broaden us in our understanding? But I think there's some other things that needs to surface on that, and maybe you have some real disagreements and you need to express them. Feel free to do so. Then if you have time, we will get into questions, if you want to, on non-formal versus formal education and inclusive versus exclusive. Let me just toss out an idea. Would you ever want to train someone who is mentally retarded in the University of Nations? Would you exclude them? John?
I'm not about to answer that. But yes. We're going to do, we got to work through some logistics here. We want everyone to be participating in groups of about 10 people. A little louder. About 10 people per group. We want to make sure that these groups represent a diversity of cultures. And we want you to select a leader with your group, for your group, and also a scribe for your group. We want to note the issues that rise. We want to note the questions that come up. These should be both questions and suggestions that come up in the context of these groups. If you can't come to unity on who the group leader is going to be, Tom's agreed to come and settle the issue in your groups. He has very strange ways of doing that, but he's happy to. Words of knowledge. So Dr. Ted is going to come and explain and reiterate some of the issues around the topic of evangelism again that he shared, and maybe go a little further. 5-7 minutes of presentation to us. And then he's going to pose some questions for the group. So I thought logistically it would be best if we went ahead, broke up into groups, and when you're set, you've chosen your leader, and you've chosen the scribe, then we'll have Ted come on up and present the issues again to us and pose the questions. We'll write the questions up on the board so it's very clear. We'll probably give, I'll tell you a little later, but around 30 to 45 minutes for these. We want to give plenty of time for the interaction. I think some of the things that were shared with us by Ray are very important right now, that we really, group leaders, whoever you end up being, make sure that you're drawing people out, you're giving plenty of time for interaction, and make sure that the group leaders aren't just representative of one or two particular cultures. Let's get a nice representation, because these same group leaders will then be the spokesmen or spokeswomen. At the end of your time, we're going to ask you to represent your group in one or two posed questions or suggestions that you have. We're going to have a panel up here that will then take the questions and suggestions that you give and interact with us in terms of what's posed here. Ted will be part of that, and Loren will have others up here with him. So group leader, whoever you end up being, you're a very important role of assimilating what comes in from the group and then presenting it to us in an open forum. Now, we're going to have a few of us, part of the facilitating team that's been helping Dar. We'll be roving around just to help you with any logistical things. If there's questions that you have, we'll be available to you. And that will be Maureen Menard from Amsterdam, Laprelle Martin, who's been involved in special projects in the Chancellor's office. She'll be helping out. And so will Dawn Goslin will be helping out, and Sarah Lanier and myself. The five of us will just roam. If you have a question, raise your hands and we'll be here to help you. Okay, let us go ahead. Any questions just about that before we break into groups? Yes. French speaking, maybe. Yes. We. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll go ahead now and let's... Any other questions? Okay, let's break up into the groups.
Points that I made this morning. We gave 4 stars to using faith in evangelism as a faith on which you make your decisions. Faith in evangelism is, as was true of all 5 of those faiths, in some respects, a worthy faith. Even the faith in school, the one I gave only 1 star, is in some ways a worthy faith. I was not this morning contrasting between worthy and unworthy faith, simply to argue that some things are worth more as focal points for your faith than are other things. Now, it is apparent that a number of us are very anxious about the possibility of losing a high valuing of evangelization within YWAM. If we were to ask each of the people who have participated as leaders in this program, which one of you is interested in reducing the emphasis on evangelism in YWAM, we would make an interesting discovery. Do you know what that discovery would be? No one is interested in reducing the emphasis on evangelization. Therefore, one of our most worthy questions, it seems to me, to get started in the real deliberations is for us to ask questions about how we best facilitate and encourage an evangelistic theme within YWAM, and what we need to do about the decisions regarding the University of the Nations, so that those decisions are made in such a way that evangelization stays at a high place of priority, and indeed, as I suggested in my lecture this morning, possibly may even expand. Interesting, one of the people coming to me after this session this morning, a person here, very few people who are not here came to me after the meeting this morning, said, you know, sometimes it seems to me that the kind of emphasis in evangelization that our particular unit does, and he described one of the kinds of evangelistic activity within YWAM, is not always recognized, even within the organization, as being an expansion on what the organization would otherwise be. You follow me? He was saying that if you simply took the common denominator of what do you mean evangelism from this group as a whole, you might exclude what he and his group are doing. Because as he sees it, his ministry and the work of the people that he is associated with is part of the expanding of the image of evangelization, even within YWAM as it is now. How many of you believe that handing out tracts on a street corner in a strange city can be an evangelistic act of worth and consequences? May I see your hands? Okay, I agree. Now, I want to suggest to you that we build an organization and we define evangelism as handing out tracts on a street corner in a strange city. We will be known as the youth with tracts on street corners in strange cities. How many of you would believe that that would be an adequate definition of evangelization to build a whole ministry around? So that doesn't sound very exciting. Very limited. All right, now what I'm asking you to do in my lecture this morning, you see, was to take whatever you use as your frame within which you position all that you think of as evangelization, and allow me to raise the question, is your frame big enough? Is your frame big enough? One of the very distinct possibilities of the movement toward the University of the Nations could be that we take a larger frame to think with. Now, I already mentioned specifically this morning that the salt and light idea versus evangelization, which, so help me, I have heard from any number of people in this room since early in January, is for some of you perceived as the argument and as the debate and as the tension, because if we emphasize the salt and light mission that comes from affecting society with a university, we will be taking energy away from evangelization. Now, I would not want to see that happen. I haven't heard of anyone else who wants to see that happen. And I am furthermore suggesting to you that it not only need not happen, it may be the very opposite of what happens. Because as I suggested to you this morning, it's not this versus that, evangelization versus a larger frame called a university. It is, in fact, part of a whole cycle of processes that exist in the whole of God's plan, and I would not attempt to represent the whole of God's plan, even in those 5 cells, but it does seem to me that theologically you have to think in terms of salt, light, relationship, church, and city. And city is a sort of paradigm of the lost world, the world that God is in love with and is, through us, attempting to buy back, to fulfill his redemption completed on the cross. Now then, all of that is evangelization. Any particular acts of evangelistic outreach will be but simple individual techniques and technologies within that whole pattern. Some do drama. Others do music. Some do counseling. Others do teaching. There are many things we do in the name of evangelizing, according to our gifts, and this is as it should be. Now, it is a difficult thing for us to think about a new structure without feeling somehow that my little piece of this whole puzzle is being lost on the floor. And some of us on top of the table are saying what a sad thing it would be if any piece is lost on the floor because the picture would be incomplete. But others of us are hurting because we feel that we have been pushed off to the floor. But that is mostly because we have very limited views of what the possibilities are. It seems to me that one of the things we need to do this afternoon in our discussions is to enlarge our thinking and say, what are the possibilities, rather than to freeze our thinking and say, what aren't our possibilities? So I would encourage you to think in constructive terms insofar as possible. Now, in order to move this forward, we're suggesting 3 questions, one of which has 2 parts. These questions, I think, will help to fulfill the sort of thing that was asked of by Loren at the very end of his remarks, starting with his question, what is evangelism? Then his second question, what is God trying to broaden? Now, you may find that those 2 questions themselves are worthy of discussion right as they are without any intermediate interpretation. And if your group wants to play with either of those 2 or both of those 2, go to it. What is evangelization? But please let me suggest that you work for a broader definition, not work toward a narrower definition. If you want to deal with the second question, what is God trying to broaden? Let me suggest that you start with the very healthy consideration of what is going on now. Because almost always the way God works in this world is to move beyond what he has already done. To move beyond what he has already done, using what he has already done as the foundation upon which to build. Not to destroy, not to walk away, not to abandon, but to move beyond. Same way one would build a house. You do not build a house by starting with the roof. You start by the building of a foundation. In many respects in the history of YWAM, there is a foundation laid. Now, what is it that we can build with God's leading on that foundation? That is the constructive side of this question. What is God trying to broaden, or what is the building that God is doing, and how can it be seen better in constructive light? Now, those 2 questions, however, may be one way to go at it, but these questions on the board may be another way. I think in some respects, the questions on the board may be a little more concrete, but who knows? At least we offered them to you. John and I kind of organized these up in the last half hour or so. The first of these asks, and group leaders or scribes or somebody, especially the scribes, you probably ought to write these down and be ready as the resource person in your group to provide these in the proper language. So get some translation of them written down. In what ways can the University of the Nations enlarge the evangelistic motives and capabilities of YWAM? Be specific. Let's hear some ideas. Second question has 2 parts, 2A and 2B. 2A, in what ways can inclusiveness, which by the way needs another S on it, does it not? In what ways can inclusiveness of the University of the Nations move us toward YWAM purposes? And the corollary, or the complementary question, in contrast, in what ways can exclusiveness of the University of the Nations move us toward YWAM purposes? I will come back and comment on that question in a moment. The third question, what safeguards should be put into place to assure the continuing evangelistic vitality of YWAM? Many of us will need to think in terms of safeguarding or protecting or making sure we don't lose certain kinds of things in the process. There's nothing inherently wrong about that. I think that it is well for us to guard and preserve and hold fast to those things that have gone before. I think this is itself biblical. But we don't want to hold on in such a way that we become obstructionist to prevent other things from building beyond. Now, I mentioned that I would ask the question, I would elaborate the second question. In my presentation, I raised the question of inclusiveness versus exclusiveness, which is an inherent question within the structures of any education that is planned. Now, we raised the question of, would you want to be excluding a mentally retarded person? And then John was asked to come and be the example. At least at the moment it seemed that way, didn't it, John? Yeah, let's face it. That's the way it worked out. These things are not easy to talk about, and they're even more dangerous to laugh about. But the fact is that there are all kinds of people whom God loves. And there are all sorts of people that we need to reach out to. I had a very fascinating conversation at lunch with a person who was describing the people that are involved in the DTSs within his base as largely not being collegiate types, but rather being hurting, bruised people who need a whole lot of healing. And even after going through a DTS, sometimes spend, as he said, another year or two trying to sort out their lives before they're ready to go on to anything else. And what will it do to that kind of a ministry if those people are approached and addressed and dealt with as if they were somehow beginning university students? Here's where the issues will become very, very tense, because exclusivity is not really comfortable among Christians. It happens that it isn't comfortable because it isn't godly. But on the other hand, the processes of inclusivity are best illustrated as in the same kind of question extended. Would you want, question A person who is mentally not really up to handling it, to do your brain surgery? Makes a little different question, doesn't it? Most of us, when we seek out someone to do something on my body, we want the best we can get. How do you reconcile that? That's a very, very tough puzzle. In what ways can inclusiveness of the University of the Nations move us toward YWAM purposes? By representing the breadth of the love of God. There's an easy answer. In what ways can exclusiveness help us? By bringing up to leadership quality and standards only the best. Sounds good, but it contradicts itself. You have no resolution. How do you stand? How do you wrestle with that one? That's enough to take us till dinner time right there. But I think you'll grow tired of that question number 2 very quickly, because it is a very demanding question and one that many of us are not really ready to deal with very deeply. Don't wear yourselves out in your group dealing with questions that don't seem to go anywhere. After a half a dozen people have made their comments and you've tried to listen to each other and you can't find anything to build on, move to another question. Is that reasonable advice? Now again, then, how many questions do you have that you potentially could work on? You actually have 5. If you think of these as 3, because that second one is really kind of like a paradox question. And then you also have Loren's 2 that he ended up with. What is evangelism? How are you defining it? And his question, what is God trying to broaden? In what ways is God broadening us, more specifically? Not a lot different from the first question up here. Any questions, comments, observations? John, have I done what you wanted me to do? We can go ahead. If I'll get off the platform, progress can... You have the remaining 4 minutes.
Okay, who would like to be the first one to ask a question or make a suggestion from the floor? Tom Bloomer, please. Yes. Is this a question is this your question, or is this one that's come out of the group that you represent? Comes from the group. Can you restate it in about 15 words? Can I have you just restate it in about 15 words? 20 is okay. Okay, criteria, rules and regulations of the university versus the word of the Lord and what God's spoken and set precedent for us. Loren, did you understand that question? Would you like to address that?
As you move along in life, you get certain principles that you begin to live by. And group principles are no different than individual principles. And I learned a long time ago not to pray over whether I would rob a bank when I was out of money. And then I began to refine some of those questions having to do with relational situations. Well, if I do this first and instead of that, I'm going to offend people. So I think that what a policy becomes is an expression of the group in which we must always leave the option for the Holy Spirit to make exceptions on that which is not a spiritual absolute, but that by and large there are certain things that we have learned through life, building line upon line, precept upon precept. But when we get to a point of rigidity in which the Holy Spirit can't break into our midst, we've got a problem. And that usually doesn't come right away, but it does come in any group. And you have to have a refreshing renewal at that time. You have a sort of a house cleaning, a spring clean. And we've learned to do that in our home, have a spring cleaning in which everything is gone through, but the rest of the time you only clean what is more obvious. And I think that in a way, that's how our principles build up. And principles get stated in policy matters, but each one should have its foundation and roots in our values, which includes, of course, the word of the Lord. And so what I'm saying is there's always a possibility for an exception, but don't let your exceptions become rules, because there are some rules that are based on a series of precedents of the word of the Lord to us and the principles that we're trying to abide by.
Ted, would you like to add that?
Let me suggest that question is an extremely good one. It's very much on target with the decision-making concerns that I have about this whole operation, at least. Therefore, I resonate with it, because it seems to me in the natural maturing processes of any human organization, human group, there do become more visible and more clear those matters that, as Loren says, are in fact operating principles. There's no question in my mind, but what if you move in the direction of an overall institutional structure, and a university of the nations, if it is going to have any kind of coherency at all, is going to have a certain amount of commonality and, on certain matters, standardization. That is going to be like everybody trying to wear the same shoe. It's going to pinch some feet, and other feet are going to slide around inside that shoe, not quite fitting. That is inevitable. Now, I believe, as a matter of fact, that would be inevitable in any organization that had approached about the age that this organization has. Therefore, that necessity for getting more clear the common beliefs and the common assumptions and the common principles should not be blamed on the idea of the University of the Nations. It should be blamed, if indeed blame is the right word, on the maturing process of this particular ministry of God in the world. It is just a normal, developmental, growing phase, and it has its uncomfortable moments. There is no question but what there will necessarily be some kinds of very difficult negotiation. I suspect that it would be possible among people of goodwill to allow a great deal of variability according to the context and the situation. And I'm going to talk more about that tonight. But suffice to say that that question is a jolly good question, which, by the way, is an old English expression.
Thank you. Question from this side? Suggestion from this side? Mike. A very good suggestion, combination question. How do we actually reach and deal with the university issues when we're reaching people who are coming in and coming up through ministry of targeting those that are hurting, those that are needy? I know in urban ministries we often start at that level. We start at the lowest level and try to work our way up through. How does that dynamic relate with the university? Howard, would you like to address that?
Well, there are several parts to that question, but let me just take one part, and that would be the hundreds of thousands and millions of students people in the age 18, say, to 23 or 4, where we receive a lot of our YWAMers that have maybe only gone through the 6th or 8th grade. They take a DTS. They've been very much turned on to evangelism. They are bright young people, but they haven't met the secondary education requirement. So what do we do about that? Because that's one of the requirements. In fact, legally, we would have to have that in the United States. And in many other countries, that would be true to enter a university situation. So we have been talking for a couple of years now about something that would be a secondary education equivalent, called a GED in some places. And we believe that a one-year type program
or an examination could be developed whereby a student that might have only gone through the 6th or 8th grade could come up to a university level just because of the way God has been leading them and imparting information into them and being very receptive. So this is an exciting challenge that we have to develop such a program. And we would like to have an international team doing that. So any of you that feel a calling in that direction, we'd like to hear from you.
Thank you, Mike. Another question? Yes, Benny.
Along those same lines, wouldn't the answer perhaps be the fact that we're going back, and there's also a question, we're going to have a double system of training, or some courses will be in the university and some courses will not be in the university, as Loren said. How should we interpret that?
Good question. Are we not going to be having a double system, both things that are related and interrelated to the university and things that are outside of, paralleling, running alongside? How do we integrate, how do we work with that dynamic?
Again, there's several parts, I think, to that question, but of course one part is the type of model schools that would be in the Faculty of Education. Now, David, I think you have another feel. Is that the...
No.
Is that, okay. Yeah. No, you take it.
Your response on the difference between education and training.
Yes. Okay. We get into a long discussion here on education and training, probably. But one of the things, of course, we're trying to accomplish is to have both the educational aspect and the training aspect, and particularly the training when it comes to the field assignments. Also, of course, the question of areas like vocational type training. I don't know if that was part of your question too, Benny, but there are several areas of the world that would like to have the university providing vocational training, but as we have seen it so far, what we want to do is to develop leaders who can become teachers in the area of vocational training. So again, to have a model school within the university setting and the various university branches would be very good, but the thrust is to develop leaders who can provide teach the teachers so that we get more rapid multiplication in the university. I don't know if that touches your question or not.
Loren?
Our spirit is in inclusiveness, of course, but we recognize, too, the voluntary or the freedom aspect of a leader not wanting a school that he develops to be a part of the university. Of course, then it truly can't be integrated in that true sense of the word. And I think in integrity, the leader must pass that on to the students so that they are not thinking they're entering into the University of the Nations. And also by logotype and other ways, we'll try to make sure of that. But on the other hand, we don't want to limit people who are called of God to do discipling and have a particular form of a school and all that really doesn't feel it's to be a part of the university, and yet they're a part of YWAM. So in one sense, you're having a dual system, but really you're not having a dual system. You're having one system with isolated ministries of training in school forms elsewhere. Our encouragement would be, why not bring it in? It's good enough to share with the whole, bring it on in and let it be integrated so your students can take part in the courses that would be available, but not forced. If that explains it, you're not really two parallel systems. You have one system plus isolated individuals wanting just separate schools, standalone.
Anyone else want to address that at all? Any other aspect of it, Tom?
Yeah, I think that's important to underline. I think the school leaders that I've talked to here and there who say, well, I can't see how my school would fit into the university, it's one of two things. It's either a misunderstanding of what we're talking about, as was addressed today. They have a view of their own experience or possibly hurts about the university. So they haven't understood the broad definition we're giving it, the missions, thrust, and everything. Or else it's a deep fear of having to fill out a form. And there are a lot of YWAMers like this. They break out in rashes if they have to fill out a form. But we can pray for healing for that too.
Yes, right here.
My group was mainly concerned about answering question number 2. But we decided that one of the approaches to answering question 2 was to explore what kind of outcomes we would like to see from question number 1. That is, in asking the question, what is the end result of our evangelistic efforts? We ended up with such things like we need to see life start, of course, birth, but then you don't want it to just stop there. At birth, we'd like to see life grow, but then we would like to see the combined grouping of growing lives come together as a church planting, so that church can then reproduce the whole process. But then what that brought us back to then is that in answering question 2, should it be more in terms of the giftings and qualities that will lead to people able to start life, people able to cause life to grow, people able to be within the church? Should the inclusiveness question be more on gifts, callings, rather than the intellectual type of abilities that we usually think about?
Okay, so does the inclusiveness relate more directly to the areas of giftings or more to the, it's fair to say, the intellectual or the academic side? Okay. Somebody like to address that? Silence. A moment to think. Commitment's been made. Ted's ready.
Well, just briefly, in one category in education, very often you find individuals that have a desire to be involved with children, and quite possibly that's a gifting in their life. In the process of some of the coursework that they've gone through, they've discovered their motivations quite possibly not right. That's not at all unusual in that category. At the same time, people that have had gifting and have never seen that challenged or formed, through the educational process, the intellectual process of seeing that form developed where they can serve effectively. And so I don't know that you can put that into this category or the other category.
Here again, I think that you're dealing with an issue that ultimately will force you, if none other, to get very, very serious on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. And I want to encourage that group to continue that subordination ritual between question 2 and question 1. I think you went at it right, and that is to decide, first of all, what you're going to ask of this process. Then you ask the second question, that is, how do you facilitate that process? Now, there's a lot of free choice to be made in all these questions. And yet I don't think within the organization, and certainly not within some totally structured thing called a university, that you're going to be all free to choose whichever way you want to go whimsically and from place to place differently. So that one is going to be tough. But, and here again, something I'm going to try to deal with a later session, it may very well be that there needs to be and can be a sort of 10 to 15-year developmental period in which there are some much larger discrepancies and disparities from situation to situation. And let the empirical experience with choosing this way or that way prove itself. You know, one of the ways that God leads is through the action by which we put to work those things that we best understand. And it very well may be that we would make a big mistake to assume that we're going to get all the answers and get them all right, and then all we got to do is just make it work. I strongly suspect that you're dealing with a complex of human factors that will require a great deal of experimentation and a great deal of variability while you're doing it to find different ways to make things fulfill. I think one of the greatest strengths you've got going for you now is that there are some functional units doing various kinds of functional education, and Dave just refers to one. And what have we learned in that sector? And what does that experience in that sector suggest about other sectors? And little by little, as you accumulate experiences, you'll have more to go on. I think the thing that frightens some of us, and perhaps frightens you as much as it does me, is the necessity of keeping something ongoing that in fact will qualify the maintenance of the certification of the university as it has existed within the state of Hawaii. And that requires that you do a juggling act. On the one hand, playing with new variables. On the other hand, maintaining some kind of faith with the powers that be as it relates to the ongoing thing. But there again, that's a problem, but I would still think at a price worth paying, because you do have an ongoing entity, and it's always better to hang on to the ongoing entity rather than destroying everything and starting over again.
For those of you that have taken notes, if you would make a special note of the differentiation between a suggestion and a question. Maybe put a star, if you could, next to suggestions. We want to make sure we're compiling the suggestions and not keeping track of things that are coming from your discussion times. Landa, please. Yes. Very good. Thank you, Landa. Walter. Thanks, Walter. David.
stand out with the inclusive, exclusive questions. And it came at two levels. One of students in the university, who realized that, again, discussing briefly about that, there are parties for inclusiveness, but there are some of our heritage or values or mission automatically have elements of exclusion. What we're looking for is the call of God in people's lives, a heart of mission. Those are hard things, but structurally, things like no salary and certainly other requirements we have do think about an exclusive nature. We just note those things and there's some talked about. The other area that we mentioned, the whole area of inclusiveness and exclusiveness that came out from a couple of different people, has to do with within YWAM and different spaces being included or excluded in the University of Nations. As it is a process that we have to do with the students in nations, just like to discuss more about the process of inclusiveness amongst us. The sense of feeling some of the, a couple of the different spaces discussed, they appreciate the 11 years experience of Kona, the elder brother, but we're just kind of in the middle of the last little while that vision has been birthed in our locale. How do we catch up with those 11 years? How do we go out to partners and peers and narrow those gaps? Those are some of the questions we'd like to maybe kind of address on both of those two different levels. That second one was not, I think, initially meant with the question two that we want to get off.
Very good. Did that, by the way, get noted, the distinction between what we, exclusiveness that's built into our system? Did that get written down in your notes? It's a very good point that we need to wrestle with. And then the two levels. Would someone like to address that a little bit, Dave's question? Very well done. Can you?
As I understand the question, the first question had to do with the fact that we do have exclusive ways that simply exclude people from coming in to Youth with a Mission, like no salaries. I had thought of it as more of an inclusive way because anybody that doesn't have a job doesn't have a salary, so we're including all the unemployed of the world and all of those looking for an opportunity. So that's just inclusive. So I just sort of turn it around somehow. I think that any group, for example, the call of God, things of that nature, there are certain areas of your ethos, your values within the group that automatically becomes a threshold across which people must walk. And so, yes, there'll always be some exclusive parts to the organization. And then in terms of the second question, within our ranks, are there ways that we can encourage newly started university schools and so on to catch up with those that have gone before? Well, that's always a problem. I've never been able to catch up with my sister, age-wise, and whoops, sorry about that. I meant in experience, wisdom, knowledge, all of those virtues. Good looks. It's just hard to catch up, but that's the nature of things. Just as some are just starting schools now, 20 years from now, other parts of the world will just be starting schools and all. So we have to find a way to integrate, to help, to encourage along, to catch up in those ways. And Howard perhaps can talk to that one.
Well, I just would like to say, David, that of course our heart's desire is that all of the branches in one very real sense are all equal. And we might have an 11-year start, but it is our desire in Kona, wearing the Kona hat for the moment, to share whatever resources that we have to help the others move ahead as rapidly as they desire in setting up their branches, whether that be in personnel or whether it's be in planning and assembling teams for helping to plan the campuses, or whether it actually is material resources that we would hope to get to that point where we could really help in that direction as well.
Just to flesh this out, for example, Glenn Martin is here somewhere, back here. And Glenn has just spent some time in Kona, and we've tried to use the resources of our architects, our engineers, and so on to help them in the campus development to get ahead in that way. The same with Nev Wilson and the program down in Tonga. But the way that you can really just initiate is initiate schools. As many schools as God gives you the leadership and the burden and the vision for, those are the ones that you really can move ahead fast, because those are tied directly to serving those students that are in your area. Now, obviously, you can't initiate a school where there's no students are in need. So that tells me that that's the area you can, that's your cutting edge right now. And that's an area you don't have to slow up. You can just start as many as you have leadership for and a need to be met. Always try to keep the view of the students. We're very much talking in the context of the university and so on, but it's really who are we serving and what do we have to offer? And on those areas, just go full speed ahead.
I think at the base school level, for staff, say, in your situation, or for students, I think the old, the way the Lord has given us, we can follow, and I've seen it work. Share the vision of the university and ask people to pray. Ask them to ask God, is this vision of God? And do we have a place in it as a school or as a base, or do I have it as a person? And we really need to trust the Lord to speak to them and for them to get it from God. And then when they get it from God, they'll be going for it. But let's just remember that it's the transmission of the vision, and they're buying in really before the Lord. They don't have to accept it as an organizational policy. That's not what we're talking about. But do they have it from the Lord? And some of the videos from this time might be useful in your location for that.
And also, Dave, just address the situation with needing for the different groups that are starting, expressions of the university that are starting in different areas. Any suggestions that you would have for those of you that are starting in different areas? What are your perceived needs? What is it that you feel that you need help in? How can you be helped in terms of resources, in terms of ideas, conceptualizing, cultural issues? It would really help to know, for those that are more or further along the line in their development, how can they help you? If you could put some suggestions if they come up in your discussions, that would be very, very helpful, so that we don't leave it at a theoretical realm, but more what's your perceived need. I think our time is about up, and we'll have Loren come and close. Thank you a lot for your participation. It was excellent.
Thank you, John, for yours. And let me ask, did any groups get to this? Which group got to number 3? Hold your hand high for the groups that did. Let's see, halfway over here. All right, just 3 groups. Be sure to give us this input back, because in the written form, make sure that this gets on the list as well. How many dealt with just number 1? How many groups only dealt with number 1? All right. We're wanting to process all of this information. Again, this is a corporate birthing that is taking place, and we need your input. And in the balance of the total, just as we saw on Saturday morning, even culturally, how God is put within the cross-cultural differences of the nations of the world. Some will emphasize the process, others will emphasize the goal, and yet together we can do both, and that's what I believe that God's going to allow within our group. There's a balance, there's a blending, there's an input that we need from you all. Be sure that this gets into the process. And in the future, our groups, we're going to cut down even further So we're gradually honing in on you. And so next group time will be 6 people instead of 12. And that will mean you'll have twice as much opportunity to say into the group. But be sure to get that information down on paper so that it can be preserved and then integrated into the total. Thank you. Thank you so much.